Hello, and welcome to the Nomiki Show. I am Nomiki Konst. We are only 11 days away, just 11 days to go. So, about last night, the debate. I don't think it really matters much whether Biden won or Trump won. What came across clearly is that we are still not talking about, as 11 days away from the election, we are still not talking about what we need to be talking about. It took 58 minutes to mention the worst economy in 90 years that everyone seems to be voting on. It took 72 minutes to get to the most important racial justice uprising in the last 60 years, with the largest on-the-streets movement in recorded American history. And it took 80 minutes, 10 minutes before the debate wrapped up, to start talking about the climate crisis, the existential threat to our future. And it is even worse than that. The clock ran out entirely before we could talk about one of the most important issues the next administration will confront. That is the concentration of monopoly power in the hands of a few big tech companies. Since they didn't talk about it last night, since it's barely been discussed in this election at all, I am going to talk about it today because I can't, because I'm not corporate media like the debate host last night. NBC, which of course merged with Universal Pictures and is owned by Comcast, which is the largest cable TV and internet service company in the country. For all the control Comcast, NBC, Universal, etc. has on information flowing in and out of your home, the scariest thing about this conglomerate is that it is nothing compared to the 5 big tech companies that permeate our lives. We are talking about monopoly power on an unheard of scale. Now, progressives have always been the enemies of monopoly power. We fought the railroads, the meat packers, the oil companies. We helped break up the phone companies because we know that monopoly power is corporate power on steroids. Monopoly power exploits its workers, exploits its customers, and it tramples its competitors. Monopoly power in the past has been one of our most important mobilizing issues. It's actually not too wonky an issue to show up on the streets and organize around. At the beginning of the 20th century, farmers helped lead the progressive movement because the railroads strangled their access to the markets to distribute their goods. In our moment, monopoly power is concentrated in these giant tech companies, Google, Facebook, Apple, and maybe the worst of all, Amazon. Europeans are way ahead of us in standing up to these corporate giants. But the reckoning is coming. Now, weren't we proud of AOC when she used her voice to help the movement on the ground block government giveaways to Amazon? You know, the bribe that several New York City Democrats signed on to with a letter inviting them into a building, a corporate headquarters near my neighborhood in Queens. Locals fought it off and won. And AOC, a local, was a huge part of that fight, scaring Jeff Bezos himself out of the city, at least temporarily. Now, that's a true progressive, fighting monopoly power and crony capitalist government. Yet, even AOC, champion of our fight against Amazon, couldn't avoid the tentacles of the Jeff Bezos octopus. To reach young voters, the other night, she went on Twitch with a get out to vote message and several hours of learning to play Among Us. Okay, I bet some of you gamers right now just looked up in bafflement or fright. Well, because you're on Twitch all the time, right? Maybe you're even playing Fortnite on Twitch right now while you're watching The Nomiki Show. Cool. Except not so cool. Because guess who owns Twitch? Amazon owns Twitch. Now don't get me wrong. Among Us is a great game for progressives to master. You have to spot the imposter who is undermining your group's unified efforts. Sound familiar? My problem is not the game. It is the owner of the platform. This is such a perfect illustration of how monopoly power is permeating our lives. To do her job of reaching young voters, AOC had to use Twitch. To get this show on air, we have to use Apple products, even if they have the blood of Chinese workers on them and rare earth minerals in them. These companies give us services we love, many of them seemingly for free. But in fact, they take our participation in their search or networking or shopping or gaming, and they use it to build vast empires of wealth and power that we become beholden to, that we become reliant on. The only beneficiaries of this concentration of wealth are the people who own it. It doesn't trickle down as much as they like to propagandize. Amazon has fought the unionization of workers, like Chris Smalls. It has exacerbated climate change in so many ways. And Jeff Bezos has rolled up billions of dollars in new wealth during this pandemic while his workers were dying of COVID while they were unprotected. And the trail of Amazon's success is littered with the bones of smaller companies crushed by its market power. Twitch, in fact, was an independent company until 2014, when Amazon outbid Google to buy it for $1 billion in cash. The only competition these tech companies, these monopolies seem to know is bidding against each other to gobble up other smaller companies. Think about this stat. You know, the Standard & Poor's Index, basically it's like the stock market that Trump loves so well. The 5 biggest companies are all tech giants. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Google in that order. Even more shocking, those 5 companies are 24% of the entire index. More concentrated wealth in a handful of companies at the top of the market than ever before. And with all that wealth comes enormous market and political power. Too much market and political power in the hands of a few corporations. Progressives, they have to say no, however they can, in whatever way and with whatever power we have, as we did in Queens. This will be one of the defining challenges for the hopefully new president, because of course the Obama administration did cozy up to many of these companies, as these companies exploited laws established by previous administrations. There is no path as individuals to avoid these companies completely. This is actually what this new kind of monopoly power looks like. We actually need government action to break up these tech giants or find other ways to curb their power. If you want, we can stream the antitrust hearings on Twitch. All right, we have a great show for you today. Malaika Jabali joins us to talk about how Democrats need to focus more on working class Black voters. But first, these are the stories at the top of my newsfeed. NPR reported on the findings of ACLED, a crisis mapping project to deduce the parts of the country that experience the highest risk of militia activity around the elections in November. For its metrics, the project assessed which areas of the country showed a law enforcement building relationships with militia, anti-lockdown protests, and heavy recruitment or activity of existent militias. Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Oregon posted the highest risk numbers overall. How many of those are swing states? Trump reposted a clip of a 60 Minutes interview in which he boasts about his intent to dismantle the existent healthcare system in America. Quote, "I hope that they end it. It'll be so good if they end it," he says in his interview, contradicting the claims of Republican senators that Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation will not be used to take away the Affordable Care Act. So healthcare advocates like Bernie Sanders himself, who crafted that legislation that added millions of people to the ACA coverage. So Sanders fired back at Trump's remarks with the comment, quote, "In the middle of the pandemic, Trump wants to throw tens of millions of people off of health insurance instead of expanding the care. Do not let him get away with it." And in terms of women's rights, the ACA is not sufficient to guarantee full reproductive rights and to remove all cost barriers to healthcare. But as it stands, to lose the ACA would strip many of their healthcare coverage. So that this is a feminist issue as well. Yesterday, Trump added the White House to a list of 32 countries declaring no international right to abortion. This group was formed as a coalition to reject the United Nations support for reproductive health. According to Mike Pompeo, who attended the signing ceremony, this declaration, quote, "defends the unborn and reiterates the vital importance of family." But by contrast, 61% of Americans support safe access to abortions, recognizing bodily autonomy and safety as major priorities. We got a lot of work to do, guys. But first, all right, we'll be back right after the break with Malaika Jabali, one of our favorites, to talk about what some of these crises are in the immediate future, the 11 days, how to talk with, engage with, and recognize the needs of a voting base that did not turn out the numbers needed in 2016 because their needs were not addressed. We're talking about working class Black Americans, especially in the Rust Belt region. We'll be back right after the break. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Hey guys, this is the time. You gotta smash that like button, get in that chat, fight it out. I want to see your comments. I know Harvey K is already yelling at me for saying Rust Belt. We'll get to that. Make sure to click subscribe. And if you're not a patron, you want to be a patron because we're going to be giving some of these away to new patrons. Wait, it's opposite. I can't do this. I'm in mirror effect. We've got bags and mugs and stickers. So make sure to join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. It is less than one nitro coffee a month to become a patron, and then you get everything in audio form, extra interviews. We have an extended interview out right now with a reporter in Greece talking about the Golden Dawn, which is a neo-Nazi group, a party that was just convicted. So you definitely want to listen to that right now. All right, Malaika Jabali is a public policy attorney and columnist for The Guardian and Gen Mag. She is one of our favorites, and this is, I think, the first time you've joined us. So thank you so much for joining us, Malaika.
Thanks for having me, Nomiki.
So I want to start off with something that's going viral, and I'm really happy you're on today because I think you've spoken about this you've articulated it so well in the past. But there is a clip from MSNBC. I'm going to play it real quick, so give me 1 second because I'm the one doing this. All right.
Nomiki, this is Dorsey. We can't hear the audio. You're going to have to reshare this with the check the audio boxes in the bottom.
Sorry about that, guys. All right. Apologies, guys. We've got I'm controlling it on my end today. Let's do this once again. I apologize, guys. Hold for, this is very unusual. There we go. There we go. Thanks for your patience.
I am totally undecided. I'd write your name in at this point.
Usually by now I would have voted already, but I'm just not comfortable with either one of them right now.
What are you looking for? What do you need to hear?
Let's start at the crime bill and the fact that he has not only not apologized, not only
Joe
not
Biden.
he has not only not rectified. Every time he reverts back to, well, it was the Black Caucus members in the church, but they were with it too. Okay, you fooled them as well.
You know, you never said I'm sorry. You know, it's like I didn't do it.
I want to hear an ironclad plan. I don't want to hear if this or if that or after the election.
Does the presence of Kamala Harris on the Democratic ticket sway you at all?
Not at all. I don't know who said she had our vote. She does not. We were supposed to grab onto Kamala with the black girl magic, but that didn't happen because she didn't right her wrongs.
Like, I hold officials accountable. I don't care what color you are. And I think that too often we automatically think that because someone looks like you, that they're going to have your best interests at heart. And that's just not simply true.
All right. So this is making the rounds right now. And on one hand, you know, I'm actually quite surprised MSNBC had the segment. And makes me think that maybe they're a little bit more concerned about voter turnout than they would admit. What's your take on this, Malaika?
I think it's unfortunate that this is something that they're catching on to less than 2 weeks before the election. If you just looked at voter turnout records from 2016, just 2 weeks after the election, the census puts out a voter supplement every year. And that was the supplement that actually led me to go to the Midwest, which is where I've done a lot of my reporting on the Black electorate. And based on that data, you could see that there has been an increase in Black voters who decide not to vote because they do not like the candidates. And if you're not giving people anything that's related to their material needs, if you are focusing little on that and focusing on being an anti-Trump vote, you're going to have some problems. And I'll kind of hedge that by saying, I do think that we're going to have increased turnout amongst some demographics. I think you might find among most demographics of African Americans throughout the regions, the South, Midwest, the West, and the Northeast, I think there is going to be an increase. But what happens is that the Black vote gets to be turned into a monolith. So when we had this turnout for Joe Biden and Black voters in substantially Black states, when there was an increase in turnout for him, for instance, in South Carolina, that became a story about the Black electorate in general. And you had people like me cautioning, as I often did in The Guardian, that this is not representative of everybody. So while I do think that Joe Biden is actually going to win, I think he's going to win amongst Black people who vote. I think you are going to have a lot of people who stay home like we did in 2016.
So just comparatively, and I'm really happy that you started to speak out about this because it was so missing from the conversation. And some folks, I mean, there are folks, historians in particular, pollsters even, who started to talk about the working class not showing up, and it immediately it became the white working class, missing the fact that really everybody who was working class of all demos did not show up in the numbers needed. But in states like Wisconsin, for instance, where notably Hillary Clinton did not set up offices, she had no real real program there. She didn't go to Wisconsin. But also there's it's extremely segregated. It's the most segregated state in the country. And there's a tremendous amount of voter suppression there because of Republicans and Koch brother funding. So, with that being said, in this election where it seems like they're putting a little bit more energy into energizing votes in the Rust Belt, I mean, at least by appearance and like having an office, maybe, do you think that they've amended enough to make sure that folks who usually turn out that are working class turn out?
I think it's going to be hard to say because this is not a Biden performance election. This is an anti-Trump election. And so whatever the Democratic Party has done or hasn't done, I think is less important than what Donald Trump has done and hasn't done. And a lot of African Americans are aware of that. So they're coming out, for instance, in Georgia, it had like the highest early voter turnout in its recorded history. So I think you're going to see a lot of anti-Trump votes. Where I do think it's going to matter is come the midterms. It's going to happen when whoever the president is going to be. I think the Democratic turnout is going to reflect the attitudes of how Black voters in the Midwest feel about the Democratic Party. I think it's too early to say right now how that's going to play out or how feelings about Joe Biden play out, because so much of it is not really about him. If you look at the statistics in terms of voter enthusiasm, it's less than it was for Hillary Clinton. So I don't think it's about enthusiasm for him at all. It is, I talked to my mom, and I'm from Atlanta, and that clip was shown in Atlanta. And folks in Georgia, Black people all over the country are just pissed at Donald Trump.
So these voters in particular that we're watching, I mean, who do they represent? Are these like, there was a lot of stuff that was missing from that clip that I would love to know. Like, do they normally vote? Who do they vote for? Are they Democrats? Are they, I assume so, but how do you speak to voters like that? What does Joe Biden need to do, maybe not now to Election Day, but afterwards, to make sure that we keep what are young voters? I mean, all of those women were young, engaged in politics and the Democratic Party now that Trump's out, hopefully out.
I think you have to look at what was engaging them before. And so during the Democratic primary, it wasn't a Kamala Harris, as they mentioned. It wasn't Kamala Harris that were actually bringing out Black, younger female voters. If you look at even an Essence poll, and Essence does not represent a radical, left-wing media outlet. It's pretty mainstream, and it appeals to middle-class women. But the number one choice that they chose in polling that Essence did was undecided. So most of them didn't know who they were going to vote for. The second was Bernie Sanders, and I think Joe Biden came in third. So amazing. From that clip, you see that you have younger Black women and younger Black men. There is a generational divide there. And the things that Bernie Sanders was talking about were the things that affect their material conditions. I know anecdotally, a lot of younger progressive Black women who are also supporting Elizabeth Warren. And so I think you have to look at what were they talking about? Canceling student loan debt. Black women in particular, they have the highest student loan debt burden. I have not heard Joe Biden really talk about that publicly. I believe he has it in his plan. He's talking about these huge unemployment and things that he's going to provide and be the next FDR, but then he's kind of talking on both sides of his mouth, because then he has an associate who's reporting that, well, Donald Trump with his tax cuts, they eliminated any ability for us to actually pay for these services that we're talking about. So I think he has to convince people he's going to pay for this and that he's committed to it. And he has not shown that yet.
Man. Let's talk a little bit more about the voting breakdown of the primary. When you look at the Black vote in the primaries, just in general, I mean, we could get specific in South Carolina if we want, but there's obviously there's a lot of factors that the closed primary versus an open primary, a lot of factors that change the way turnout looks, but depending on the state. But in general, how does it break down generationally?
You definitely, at least in the earlier contest before we had the threat of coronavirus, there was a clear generational divide, even in the South, between the two, front runners, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. In South Carolina, that was the case. In North Carolina, that was the case. I mean, in just about every contest, you saw a generational divide, even if you went down to a level of looking at racial demographics. There was a demographic breakdown between, I'm going to say, voters who were 50 and older and those who were 49 and younger. because a lot of those younger, and, you know, people kind of changed, they shifted the goalposts of what a young voter meant. So, you know, being 49 and 48, you've got a mortgage, or being in your 30s, these are people who actually supported Bernie Sanders in, I think, amounts that people weren't really expecting. Yeah. So that generational divide is very clear. But even in some states that were more liberal, you did see a lead for Joe Biden in South Carolina in particular, where everyone is talking about this. Most people who voted for Joe Biden in that election did not decide, you know, weeks in advance. They decided within the last 3 days. And Bernie Sanders was actually leading in polling amongst African Americans just 3 days before South Carolina. So to me, is that
the Clyburn effect?
Yes. To me, that clearly states that this is an anti-Trump. What does the Democratic Party say is going to win? And let's just go with that. Because people were still undecided 3 days before the election.
I mean, that also shows how powerful Bernie's message in the last 4 years has become. And that it really took somebody like a Jim Clyburn to influence them to realize, like, oh, we might be they may have warmed up to Bernie Sanders or other candidates. But Clyburn had to say, like, he doesn't have a shot for them to move over. It's very interesting. In 2016, there was a concentrated effort to suppress the black vote across the country, but in specific swing states, by Donald Trump by sending out confusing information, putting people on the ground to disrupt. These are like Roger Stone dirty trick tactics that he's been doing for years. And Democrats would say it was Russiagate, but I think it was just the Trump campaign trying to suppress a vote. This time around, they're doing it again. How much did it actually influence the turnout? Do you think it influenced the turnout? It's hard to measure, obviously, in 2016. And is it doing especially with the Kanye on the ballot, like, is it doing anything this time around?
So I'm going to have to take a step back a little bit with the caveat or the disclaimer that voter suppression is always an issue that Black Americans have faced, from poll taxes to intimidation at the polls to the 1960s level of intimidation, where we're just fighting for the Civil Rights Act. So this is something that is ongoing, that we have consistently have to fight back. In my state of Georgia, this is something that we had to fight in 2012. There were strong cases of voter suppression and instances of that when it came to even some of our local candidates. So it's a serious issue. Unfortunately, we do not have enough politicians and data scientists who are actually committed to understanding fully where and how it operates. And so you had a lot of, I would say, misinformation, frankly, about the 2016 election. So for instance, Hillary Clinton, she did an address in Selma and said that, well, I lost Wisconsin because of the rollback of the Voting Rights Act after the Shelby case, Shelby v. Holder. And so because of that, I lost the state. But Wisconsin wasn't one of the states that was under the protections of the Voting Rights Act.
Interesting.
They instituted the voter ID law about, I want to say, 2 years before the Shelby case occurred, because that is just Republican mechanics. They work to undermine and suppress black voters, and they know that a voter ID law could suppress the vote. However, when you actually look, I'm just looking at Wisconsin because that's where I studied the most. When you actually look at the limited data, that is out there, there was a University of Wisconsin-Madison study that showed that about 47% of voters in the two most Democratic counties, Wayne County and Milwaukee County, where it is more Black voters than throughout the rest of the state, the top reasons why people did not vote is because they were disinterested and because they disliked the candidates. That was 47% of the amount of non-voters. But things related to voter suppression, like the voter ID law, for instance, amounted to like 2 to 4%. So it was like voter ID law or long lines at the polls, registration problems. Those all amounted to 4. I believe it was around 4%, but I'd have to look at my numbers, and you can find the study, and I've put it in a number of my articles. Yeah. So to have that minimal amount in the data that shows that voter suppression is actually related to this shows that there's something else going on here that the Democratic Party needs to address, and it probably has to do with their own candidates and policy positions.
What did it come down to? Do you know off the top of your head the number of votes? Was it like 20,000 votes in Wisconsin or something?
It was about 22,000 votes. And the voter turnout for white people actually declined as well. So white voter turnout in Wisconsin declined by 1%, which reflected about 100,000 votes. Black voter turnout was only 47% in Wisconsin. And so that amounted to 88,000 votes that were lost. So 188,000 people, nearly 200,000 people who voted in 2012 did not vote in 2016. And if the plurality of those of a study is showing that those voters did not like the candidates, that should inform us of what's happening here.
So in other words, they stayed out. It wasn't like they flipped to Trump. Now, do you have a sense off the top of your head of how that compares Republicans, in let's say 2008 to 2016 in terms of Republicans turnout? Because the whole thing right now, the whole argument they're making is they can flip the Obama voters back to the Democrat that went to Trump back.
So I did a comparison, and I'm going to see if I can pull that up so I can give you actual numbers. The Republican turnout was relatively the same. So it's not like there was a massive, and I'm thinking specifically of the three primary battleground states that we've been talking about with 2016. That's Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And so in those three states, the Republican turnout was on par with the turnout of Mitt Romney. But what you saw instead was a inordinate amount of voter decline amongst the Democratic Party base.
Wow. Do you think that we'll hit it with the anti-Trump vote? I mean, I know you say that there's record, but
I don't get too embroiled in kind of horse race politics because I don't think a lot of us are equipped to really predict elections. You just have no idea. Wisconsin wasn't even considered. It wasn't on that list of battleground states in 2016. So we really do not know how the electorate will ultimately decide. I do sense, though, just based on my visits to the region, I went back to Wisconsin about 2 months ago, based on my sense in the region and just my interactions with folks throughout the country, some of my reporting during the debates, is that is going to be strong enough where I do not see a scenario. I don't think it's realistic that Donald Trump is going to win. It could happen, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Can only hope. Malaika Jabali, I mean, I have so many more questions for you, so we hope to have you back on soon. But this is such an enlightening conversation. I love how prepared you are, how research, like you're really in this, and it's a topic that just is not getting enough attention. And I mean, the fact that this went on MSNBC today, I almost lost my mind. Like, took them long enough, like you said, 11 days before the election.
I've been drumming this beat for 3 years.
I know.
So good on MSNBC for finally getting it together when it's like, does it really matter that much anymore? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, you should be on there, All right. Thanks, Malaika. We will hopefully see you again right after the election. We can talk about these numbers and how they added up.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
Thanks. All right, everyone. We will be back with our panel. We are going to it's a Femme Friday, so we have Fatima Iqbal-Zubair. She's going to correct me on how I said her name, of course. And Christine Pellegrino. They are both running for state offices, legislative seats in 2 major Democratic states. And they're women, and they're progressive, and they're all endorsed by Bernie Sanders. So you definitely want to stay around for that because, we got to pay attention to these local races. This is how these voting laws turn. You need more progressives that are unafraid to take on the Koch brother-funded Republicans, and that's what both of them are doing. So stick around. We'll be right back. Yep. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Guys, make sure to click that subscription button in the corner and smash that like button and get in that chat. Let's shake it up. Let's make this, let's take on those monopolies, like I said at the top. That's how you disrupt their algorithms, because we're progressive. We can outsmart them. All right, I'm excited. This is Femme Fridays. I will absolutely say I love all of our other guests during the week, but Femme Fridays are my favorite because most cable news, most media, even online, even progressive media, does not profile women, progressive women enough. They're not invited on shows enough. They don't pitch themselves, which happens a lot. We get a lot of pitches. I would say 98% of them are from men. So we are doing our best to seek out incredible voices, incredible progressive leaders who deserve this attention. And just the other day, I was at a rally. It was like a California progressives rally, and I was introduced, and if she hadn't been invited to that rally and given a platform, I would have not known about Fatima Iqbal-Zubair. Did I say that right?
Yes.
I did it. Wonderful. Fatima is running for state assembly in California's 64th district. She's an environmental and educational advocate. She has been endorsed in her race by Senator Bernie Sanders. And then we have Assemblywoman Christine Pellegrino. She's a former New York State Assemblywoman and an organizer for a teachers union. She was a teacher for decades. She is currently running for New York State Senate and also endorsed by Senator Bernie Sanders. Christine, can you just unmute yourself, Assemblywoman? Excuse me. There we go. So I just want to start off because I think this will paint the picture for the entire segment here. Christine was a Bernie Sanders delegate in 2016, and that's how I got to know her. We were part of the delegation together. And soon after the primary, everybody was getting really activated, and, she's also an environmental activist, and we were showing up at anti-fracking events together and demonstrations for Standing Rock. And when I was doing stories on charter schools, I would always call her up and say, okay, tell me what's going on, because New York State is severely underfunded when it comes to public education, despite being a Democratic state, as California is too, which is why I wanted to talk about this. But Christine decided in a special election, after Trump got elected, there was an opportunity for her to run for assembly. And within 4 months of Trump's election, she flipped her Long Island district, which won with Trump by 20 points. She flipped it 40 points and won. And I think there's a message here in that a lot of these districts across the country that we just haven't played in, Democrats thought were unwinnable, can be won when you have a working class candidate talking about issues like funding education and environmental. So now Assemblywoman Pellegrino is running against a Republican state senator and in Long Island. And it's actually a district that's more Democratic leaning. So Christine, can you just talk a little bit about your district and some of the key issues that are at stake in your district alone?
Sure. Thank you so much, Nomi. I can't thank you enough for your help and support and to be here today. I'm a little bit off the campaign trail today. Some of the important district issues that we've always faced are funding our public schools, supporting our environment, protecting our coastline, and something that you might be familiar with is the overdevelopment of our community and the influence of real estate and how we have politicians that are in the pockets of real estate. The industry is infiltrating and it is something that's affecting us here on Long Island as well. And that is taking money out of our and away from our children. And
we lost your
have
video,
a senator.
Christine, are you
Yep,
still there?
I'm
There
here.
you go. Oh, there you are.
We have a senator who's in the pocket of the real estate industry and takes money away from the funding of our schools. And we have to make sure that we have somebody who stands up and fights for every dollar that we deserve.
It's interesting because there's a similar fight happening in California. There are two industries that basically held up the New York State Senate, for those of you who don't know, up until 2 years ago. For decades, in New York State, a Democratic state, you had a Senate that was elected to be Democrat. You had 8 senators that were Democrats caucusing with Republicans, holding up the Senate, but they were all funded by real estate developers and charter schools. And those are the two industries that were holding everything up. Everything up. Reproductive rights, reproductive justice, safe issues, gun reform legislation. So in California, you have a supermajority, Fatima. What's going on in your district right now?
Oh my gosh, so much. A lot of the similar issues as Christine talked about, but it's exactly that. As a state, we have the most wealth, which is good if you're using it right, but it's unfortunately in the hands of the many billionaires we have, in the hands of corporations. And we see what's happening during COVID is that we see folks losing their jobs and losing homes while, these corporations and billionaires are getting richer. So it's a completely rigged system, and the wealth is definitely not distributed in the right way. We have one of the lowest funded school districts here as well in LAUSD, and as a teacher, I saw that firsthand. I saw how much that impacted my students, because there's so much you can do and how hard a student can work, how much a teacher can bring, but then there's limits in when resources are limited. And there was a lot of that. So there's definitely that issue. There's the issue of the cost of college. It's so expensive in California as well. My son has autism, and just our state funded pre-K is really not funded well at all. There's also a lot of drilling that's happening in our state, a lot of fracking. And it is similarly to what you just talked about. There are great environmental bills, like a buffer zone bill that was blocked by Democrats. We have no excuse here to not pass these bills. We supposedly have a Democratic supermajority in both houses and a Democratic governor, but there is this over dependence on oil because of the money in politics. So that's a huge issue as well. We also have the largest homeless crisis in the entire country, which, if any state could solve it, it should be us, because we have the means to do so, but we're choosing to, again, the same story, put our funding in the wrong places. So those are some of the issues here as well. And that are really urgent to solve. People's lives are on the line.
What is your race looking like right now? Who are you running against?
Yeah, so I'm running as a Democrat against Mike Gibson, who's also an incumbent Democrat. And
because it's a top two. I'm sorry, just to make it clear, in California they have this thing called the jungle primaries.
Yes,
so you can have a runoff between two Democrats at the top. Not always a Republican or a Democrat.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and our district has historically went blue, but to me, he has actually, voted in line or worse than some of the Democrats. It's why he got a 22% on his Sierra Club report card this year. He did even worse the years before that. He's the second biggest acceptor of corporate money, so his policies are, directly impacted by that. And, there was a bill up there where we could have ended qualified immunity. And Black Lives Matter had to do an action against him because he was stalling this bill. He had a last minute, yes vote, and the speaker didn't bring it on the floor, conveniently. And this could have really changed the way we did things in our state. In the span of my campaign in 2 or 3 months, we had 3 Black boys get shot, in our community. With no, evidence released, with no really investigations happening. And yes, I'm running against a Democrat, but honestly, I wouldn't be running for this seat as a first-time candidate if my assembly member was doing a good job. And with what I've seen my students going through and my community going through, one of these shootings was 10 minutes from my own home. I have a son, and so this is personal to me as well. It's not right. It's really not right. And he's been there 6+ years, and it's just, he's clearly, his record shows it. And, funny enough, I'll bring this up today. He released a mailer attacking me, saying that apparently I'm lying about his record, when everything, by the way, Nomi, is cited. It's all, Assembly Member Christine, how your votes are public. I can't make anything up. Your funding is public. It's what you report. I can't make anything up. And we've done nothing of the sort. We run an honest campaign, but he's obviously threatened by the Bernie Sanders endorsement, by the amount we've been able to fundraise. And I don't know, my husband was like, this is good. I'm like, yeah.
Oh, it's definitely good. He's defensive. If he's sitting there saying, his response, I just saw the front of that mailer, is right. Lying. That's it? Right. Why lying about Gibson's record? And then that's it. And so...
Yeah, and I'm bankrolled by special interests. I'm apparently bankrolled by special interests.
I love that. I love the new... Well, there's also a racial component to that, which is let's call that out as we see it. But that's their jam. So Assemblymember Pellegrino, the reason why I think two things are happening here, right? In New York, while it's a Democratic state, it's extremely tight. So if you have, dollars to spare for either one of these candidates here, Fatima or Christine, please do so, because these are races. I mean, we love our congressional members. We love the ones that are in safe districts that are there fighting for us. But right now, you have folks that are in really tight races locally that don't have the national presence, even when they're endorsed by Bernie Sanders. He's endorsing a lot of candidates. So we have to do all we can to help them buy their last mailer to fight that off. So, Christine, you're running against a Republican, and they're out for blood. Like, in New York politics, they want that Senate back. There is a majority, but they need a supermajority so that there are more voices like yours and Jabari Brisport, who's going to be a senator. He doesn't have a real contested race now. But Christine, you're on mute right now. Can you tell us a little bit about your opponent and his record?
Yeah. So my opponent is a Republican. He is one of the last remaining of the Long Island Nine. He was
what does that mean, the Long Island Nine?
So the bastion of Republican senators from Long Island who sort of came in under this red control of the Republican Senate that did hold up common sense gun legislation and women's health, safety, and how about electoral reforms
oh my God,
that
huge,
we currently enjoy, right? We have early voting now. We have absentee ballot curing bills that make sure that every ballot is counted. Really important legislation that has been moved forward. How about the Women's Reproductive Health Act that was passed in 2019 when the Senate finally flipped, which he voted no as a minority member. We have a potential for the abolishment of Roe v. Wade. We can't thank New York enough for protecting our women's health, especially if we're going to lose the Affordable Care Act potentially. These are really incredible times that we're facing. It definitely doesn't go far enough, and there's certainly much more that we can do. The funding and the expansion of charter schools and the money that takes out of our public system is unconscionable for what it does to minority children, and the price that pays for every one of us, right? And the false pretenses that privatization model is played. So he sort of plays himself off as a moderate, like he's got talking points on both sides, a little something for everybody. He walks back his support for gun safety because he knows that this is a blue district. This is a district that does have more Democrats than Republicans. He understands he's a marginal member. He's kind of on the ropes. He won't say anything that ties himself too much to Trump. But he is out there putting government now with with Blue Lives Matter, right? And that is sort of an abomination, right? Not that we shouldn't.
It's basically. I mean, it has been what 2 years ago, Martin O'Malley, or 3 years ago, Martin O'Malley was saying openly, like all lives matter, whatever he said.
Right.
It is now a QAnon slogan. Like, they're selling flags. Like, if you have one of those flags, you are associated with QAnon. So I think this is so important for folks to understand. Like, you're in a Democratic district, and this guy is like one of the leftovers from this era. And folks, like, this is the stuff you got to pay attention to. Christine's voice as a teacher, both of you are teachers, you're union members, you're organizers, you're Bernie Sanders endorsed, you're activists on the ground, you're both involved in environmental politics, which is also an issue that cuts both ways. Christine, you know this. Right. There are Long Island.
And he sells himself as an environmentalist as well. He's got a good record, because it's easy to say, I check the boxes on the environment. It's easy to put.
But he was in the Republican legislature holding up all the environmental legislation. It's like, it's great to say that.
Sure. And it is not hard to vote right on some of those key bills, and come out with a report card And I say it has to go beyond that, right? We have to have the right legislators doing the right thing for the issues as the minimum, not, that should be the jumping off point, right?
Yeah.
That can't be the only thing. You can't just show up and say that is the only thing that you're doing to earn the trust of the people. What else have you done? And what have you done lately? Certainly as a minority member, you can't deliver the funding that we deserve, and you don't represent the values of our district anymore.
Because we're the majority. So if you go in, just like Fatima, if you go in a majority, if you're not doing something while you're in the majority, and he's obviously in the minority, even if he's for whatever he says he is, you have more power.
Yeah, it goes a little bit beyond that. At this point, our progressive agenda needs a suburban progressive. It needs champions in the suburbs in order to defeat the idea that these are only city progressives that are going to carry these issues, because we have a concentration of liberal or progressive people who live in, in
my neighborhood,
in the urban centers and in the red districts or the purple districts. People don't go for that. People don't care to support those issues when we know that what we care about are the same things. What we care about is healthcare, the environment, school funding, clean air, clean water, making sure that our communities are safe, that our politicians are not bought by the real estate industry. And by the way, the real estate industry and the billionaires are playing very heavy in making sure that moderates are building a wall and securing their votes to hold off. We need progressives, a coalition to fend off a moderate attack and put forth some of that legislation that we desperately need. If we want a tax code that is going to get the funding for public schools, we need progressives in order to champion that. If we want a New York Health Act that puts forward good health care, we need progressives to do that.
Which is Medicare for all. Yeah.
Right.
So Fatima, you're part of that. I mean, you want you have one of these moderates that is holding up stuff that they've invested in, even with the supermajority. So tell us right now, like, what are you planning on doing the next 11 days until election, and how can folks, I mean, for both of you, I'd love for you to just give us a path forward, what's in the final minutes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I never thank you for having me on the show in the beginning. So I just thank you for having me as well. Sorry, I forgot that. But it's such an honor to be here. Yes, I do have a moderate who's doing that, who is, by the way, raised about I forgot to mention this. California politics is very expensive, and our districts are big. So we have about 270,000+ registered voters, and my goal was to raise about 600,000, which is actually really low. He's raised almost $1.5 million. So I want folks to understand that. And it's 99% all from, these big, oil company donations, casino donations, payday lenders, real estate, you name it. So, my donations are 99% the other way, individual, and, corporate PAC free and everything. And so honestly, what I'm feeling in my mind right now, that I'm feeling most anxiety about is you said it right, Nomiki. I'm actually trying to fundraise another 40,000-50,000 these last 7 days, because honestly, we've sent out our mailers. He knew probably this would happen. And if we don't raise the money, we wouldn't be able to defend ourselves at this point. And that's unfortunate. We've exposed his record, but at the end of the day, voters are busy. And if they're seeing more from him than me, I mean, that's going to be unfortunate. It's not me, right? It's not about me or Christine here. It's about people's lives. It's about Black boys not getting shot. It's about having clean water, which I didn't have at my school. It's about good schools. It's about making sure people, these policy affects people's lives at the end of the day. This is politics, yes, but people's lives are affected. And so basically when people donate, I want them to know that, in getting us, we're just the vessels. We are simply going to be listening to the voices and hoping to make our lives better, living in the district, our families' lives, and the lives of our neighbors. That's what it's about. And, Christine, I just want to address my opponent did the same thing. All of a sudden, I had debated him earlier, and, California passed a very preliminary Green New Deal. They didn't really pass it. They introduced it, and it wasn't really nearly far enough. But he, miraculously signed on to it yesterday as a co-author. I'm like, all because I had been attacking him on his environmental record, and all of a sudden, he's like, I've done especially well this session, especially on the environment, when he's one of the lowest voting, the worst voting on the environment. And so they'll do anything to just really get elected, and they'll lie. And I think that's the difference between me and Christine. We won't lie. We can defend our record. We can defend our community work, right? And I think that's the saddest part, that they can buy this election unless we get donations. And so, yeah, I hope we can, my website is fatimafораssembly.com. And if you can donate generously in California, our maximum donation is $4,700. And so if you, which is, good and bad, but if you're able to right now and you're not real estate, you're not, from the oil companies, that you can donate, please use your privilege and donate. I'm not going to say no. Well,
because just to put it in perspective, a mailer is at least $30K to mail out, and you need a few days to do it. You have to. I want people to understand, it's great that these endorsements come last minute, but if you have that money earlier, if you have those coalitions earlier, you're really able to fend off these attacks earlier. So, Christine, you're same exact situation. This is, they pound progressives. If you could take in 30,000 to what are the limits in New York? This is going to blow your mind, guys.
Well, the limits in a Senate race are 11,800. So if there's anybody out there with a $10,000 check to pour in, that is an amazing gift at the end. And what happens generally is that everybody coalesces around one or two candidates that they think are the sure thing, right? That's right. Everybody pours in, and they want to be part of the winning coalition, and we understand that. We all want to see good victories, and we don't want to deny that for sure, but to then spread the wealth, right? Awesome. Make sure that everybody who has a shot to win should win and can win, because we absolutely have the ability to win. But he's already tied us to Bernie and made that a bad thing. So we think that that's actually a very good thing. We're proud of our ability.
Because you have a ton of teachers too, right? Long Island has more teachers than anywhere in the state.
Yes, so but unfortunately, that's a little bit of a harangue.
And you're a teacher too, so let's just make this very clear. Teacher running against a Republican who doesn't like Bernie Sanders.
Yes, we've made lots of contacts on the ground with actual everyday teachers who support our effort to be the teacher voice in this race, who want to have a teacher voice in the Senate, and we're very grateful for all of their support. Yes, they
know that they held it up. They held up all the funding. Yes. So awesome. Yes. All right, we're going to put all of your links in the descriptions, guys. 11 days. This is how we win elections. If they're going to pound them with negative ads, if they're going to do the smears, this is one thing I really want folks to understand. It is not easy to run as a progressive woman, as a working class woman. You have to hit all these other metrics that, in general, with Democrats, they're never going to look at you. But then you have to raise a certain amount of money, have a staff, before even the big progressive names come in and say, okay, now you get the endorsement. It takes so much more work. You don't have all the wealthy friends. You don't have the $11,000 donations or $4,700 donations. And then, you just get enough money, and if you could just take it through the end. So that's what matters. This is when it can really make a difference. So if you have extra funds, please, 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 support candidates like Fatima and Christine, and we'll be highlighting many more in the coming weeks, or in the coming 11 days, I should say, and making sure that we have strong progressive voices in both California and New York who are going to be, if we look to California and New York for leadership because they do have the majority, we need progressive voices there so they can actually push it. And then as these states go, you can do it more in other states. So I want to thank you guys for you gals for joining. And this is my favorite day. It's Fun Fridays. So thank you so much for everything you do. And we'll be watching and cheering you on Election Day.
Thank you, Nomi, for having me. I really enjoyed this conversation. And good luck, Christine, to you as well.
Oh, she's on mute, but she says thank you too. Because you guys are working. So it's we want to get you however we can in the middle of your campaign.
Yeah.
Thank you to you as well. The campaign trail is very hard.
Mm-hmm. It is. Thanks, guys.
Bye for now.
Okay, bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's show. We are going to be doing a lot of election commentary next week. It's going to be very exciting. We're planning a big election night event, too, day event. So definitely mark your calendars. Election day is, of course, Tuesday, November 3rd. So make sure, if you aren't already, subscribing and join us on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. In the meantime, we are putting up a bunch of special interviews. Today I'm doing one with Professor Harvey Kaye, who I believe is in the chat right now. We're going to be talking about how Bernie Sanders is being floated as the labor secretary. And if you missed last night's debate, you can watch it on our channel. You can also watch the commentary. We had Michael Figueredo from the Humanist Report join after, and we talked for about an hour about the debate, what's at stake, the next 11 days, and what we can do as a movement starting Election Day. That's when it matters, not after inauguration, starting Election Day, to pressure hopefully Joe Biden into making sure that the appointments to the cabinet are progressive. And that's what I'm going to talk about with Harvey Kaye today. But make sure to check those out. And we have another interview going up with Dr. Jim Zogby talking about Lebanon, really important interview. That'll be up on Patreon first extensively. The full interview will be on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. We're also going to be doing something on Bolivia and Armenia. And if you didn't see the Golden Dawn interview yet, definitely check that out. It's really fascinating. I definitely recommend you listen to that interview. Special thanks from yesterday, Raul Ventura. Thank you so much for the donations for a new camera. We are trying to do that. I need something that I can work with a little bit better. So if you have a few extra bucks and want to throw it into Super Chat or anywhere, eternally grateful. Of course, if you're a patron, that's even better. Thank you to Professor Harvey Kaye for mixing it up in the live chat, and MIDI Doctors for working the algorithms, and of course, Bob the Mod for keeping the chat room honest. Much love to you all. We will see you next week on Tuesday.